The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the sterile corridors of Sunset Manor nursing home, casting harsh shadows across the linoleum floors. October 15, 1995. Room 237 housed Harold "Hank" Morrison, a frail 78-year-old man who spent his days staring out the window, occasionally muttering incomprehensible numbers to himself. The nurses had grown accustomed to his vacant stare and his habit of scribbling equations on napkins, mathematical gibberish, they assumed, from a mind lost to time. 300 miles away, at Johnson Space Center in Houston, chaos erupted in mission control. Red warning lights bathed the room in an ominous glow as controllers frantically worked their stations. The Space Shuttle Endeavour, carrying 6 astronauts and critical supplies for the International Space Station, was experiencing a catastrophic systems failure. Oxygen levels were dropping rapidly, navigation computers had gone dark, and communication was intermittent at best. "Flight Director, we're looking at a total loss of mission," announced the lead systems engineer, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "All backup systems are failing. We need options and we need them now." Back at Sunset Manor, Harold stopped his muttering. For the first time in months, his eyes focused with laser precision on the television screen broadcasting the emergency. His weathered fingers began moving across his napkin with purpose, scrawling calculations with the speed and accuracy of a master. The equation he wrote would have made Newton weep with joy, but the orderly walking by barely glanced at what appeared to be another rambling from the confused old man. Harold Morrison knew something no one else in that nursing home could comprehend. He was the only person on Earth who could save those astronauts. The question was whether anyone would listen to a man they'd written off as senile. The memories came flooding back as Harold stared at the television screen. 1967, Apollo 1. The screams of Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee echoing through his headset as their command module became an inferno during a routine ground test. He had been the lead flight director then, the youngest man ever to hold that position at NASA. The investigation that followed revealed a web of design flaws, rushed timelines, and corporate negligence that had cost 3 good men their lives. Harold closed his eyes, transported back to that sterile conference room where he had presented his findings to a panel of NASA executives and government officials. His 847-page report detailed systematic safety violations, inadequate testing protocols, and a culture that prioritized schedules over astronaut safety. But the political machinery was already in motion. The Vietnam War was escalating, public support for the space program was wavering, and Congress was threatening budget cuts. Someone had to take the fall. "Mr. Morrison," the NASA administrator had said, his voice as cold as deep space, "your findings are concerning. But we need to consider the bigger picture here. The Russians are breathing down our necks, and we cannot afford to appear weak or incompetent." Harold had refused to alter his report. That decision cost him everything. Within 6 months, he was quietly reassigned to a desk job in Cleveland, his security clearance revoked, his reputation systematically destroyed. His wife Sarah had stood by him initially, but the stress of the blacklisting, the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room, and the financial strain had slowly eroded their marriage. She left him in 1973, taking their daughter Rebecca with her. The years that followed were a blur of alcohol, depression, and odd jobs that never lasted long. Former colleagues avoided him at professional conferences. His name was scrubbed from official NASA histories. The man who had helped put Americans on the moon became a ghost, his contributions erased as if they had never existed. But Harold had never stopped learning, never stopped calculating. Even as his body aged and his social skills atrophied, his mind remained sharp, constantly running scenarios, solving problems, staying current with aerospace technology through technical journals and late-night internet research. Now, watching the crisis unfold on television, Harold felt the familiar weight of impossible decisions. He knew the exact failure pattern Endeavour was experiencing because he had predicted it in a classified memo 15 years earlier, a memo that had been buried along with his career. Hey, pause for a second and let us know in the comments where you're watching this from. We love connecting with viewers from around the world, and it helps us understand our amazing global community better. The irony was crushing. The very safety protocols he had tried to implement after Apollo 1 might have prevented this disaster, but his warnings had been dismissed along with his credibility. As he watched the young engineers on television scrambling for solutions, Harold realized that his exile to this nursing home might have been preparation for this moment, the ultimate test of whether genius and truth could triumph over politics and pride. The nursing home erupted into controlled chaos as a black sedan pulled into the circular drive. General Patricia Reynolds, director of NASA's Crisis Management Division, stepped out wearing her dress uniform, her silver stars catching the afternoon sunlight. Behind her followed Dr. Marcus Chen, NASA's current flight director, and a team of engineers carrying laptops and communication equipment. Nurse Jennifer Walsh intercepted them at the front desk, her protective instincts flaring. "I'm sorry, but visiting hours don't start until..." "Ma'am, this is a national emergency," General Reynolds interrupted, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "We need to speak with Harold Morrison immediately." Jennifer's face twisted with confusion and skepticism. "Mr. Morrison? He's one of our Alzheimer's patients. He barely speaks coherently. I think you might have the wrong room 237, Dr. Chen interjected, checking his tablet. Harold Eugene Morrison, born March 15, 1917. Former NASA flight director, Apollo program. The words hit Jennifer like a physical blow. In 3 years of caring for Harold, she had never known his background. To her, he was just the quiet old man who drew pictures of rockets and mumbled about trajectories. Meanwhile, in Mission Control Houston, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Endeavour's life support systems were failing faster than projected. Commander Sarah Mitchell's voice crackled through the static. "Houston, we're down to 47 minutes of oxygen. Whatever you're planning, it better happen fast." Back at Sunset Manor, the confrontation in room 237 was unlike anything the facility had ever witnessed. Harold sat in his wheelchair, his back to his visitors, still scribbling calculations. General Reynolds approached cautiously, her usual commanding presence tempered by uncertainty. "Mr. Morrison? Sir, we know who you are. We know what you did for this country, and we know we failed you. But right now, 6 people are going to die unless you help us." Harold's hands stopped moving. Slowly, deliberately, he turned his wheelchair around. The man who faced them was not the confused patient the nursing home knew. His eyes were sharp, calculating, filled with decades of suppressed anger and bitter wisdom. 30 years, Harold said, his voice hoarse but steady. 30 years of silence. You destroyed my life, ruined my family, erased my contributions. And now you come here when you need me? Chen stepped forward, his youth and earnestness a stark contrast to the general's military bearing. "Sir, I've read your Apollo 1 report. Every word. You were right about everything. The safety protocols you recommended could have prevented a dozen accidents, including this one." "Could have," Harold repeated bitterly. "But you buried it. Just like you buried me." Jennifer Walsh found herself caught in the middle of a conversation that redefined everything she thought she knew. The man she had been feeding pudding to, the man whose medication she monitored, had once held the lives of astronauts in his hands. The weight of that revelation was staggering. Before we continue, if the story is giving you chills, please hit that subscribe button and give us a like. We're working hard to reach 1,000 subscribers, and your support means everything to us. General Reynolds pulled up a chair, positioning herself at Harold's eye level. "You're right to hate us. We made terrible decisions and good people paid the price. But those astronauts up there, they're paying the price for our mistakes too. Sarah Mitchell has a 6-year-old daughter. Tom Rodriguez just got married last month. They don't deserve to die for our sins." Harold's resolve wavered. The mention of Sarah Mitchell, a name he recognized from the mission roster, struck a nerve. Her psychological profile reminded him of the daughter who no longer spoke to him. "What makes you think I can solve this when your entire team can't?" Harold asked, though his eyes had already drifted back to the equations on his napkin. "Because, Dr. Chen said quietly, we've been trying to solve it using current protocols. But you designed the backup systems. You understand the architecture better than anyone alive. And sir, We found your 1980 memo. The one predicting exactly this type of cascade failure. The room fell silent except for the distant sound of televised mission control chatter. Harold stared at the young flight director, seeing himself 30 years younger, full of idealism and belief in the system. The cycle was about to complete itself, either in triumph or tragedy. "Get me a secure line to Houston," Harold said finally. "And someone find me a proper calculator. We have 43 minutes to prove that truth doesn't have an expiration date." The secure communication line crackled to life in Harold's room as a laptop was hastily set up on his bedside table. On the screen, Mission Control Houston appeared in all its crisis-driven intensity. Flight Director Amanda Torres looked exhausted, her team working frantically as countdown displays showed oxygen levels dropping into the critical zone. "Houston, this is Harold Morrison," he said into the microphone, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. The room in Houston fell silent. Amanda Torres stared at the screen in disbelief. "I'm sorry, who is this? We're in the middle of a life-or-death situation here." "Ma'am." General Reynolds intervened over the comm. "This is General Reynolds. Mr. Morrison is our emergency consultant. You need to listen to him." "A consultant?" Amanda's voice cracked with stress and disbelief. "We have 31 minutes until total life support failure. I don't have time for..." "Apollo 7, October 11th, 1968, Harold interrupted, his voice cutting through the noise like a laser. "Primary environmental control system failure at mission, elapsed time 260 hours, 12 minutes. You couldn't restart it because the backup thermal control valve was installed backwards. I was the one who figured that out." The Houston control room went dead quiet. Amanda Torres's face went pale as she recognized the historical reference, a near disaster that had been classified for decades. Harold continued, his memory sharp as a blade. "Skylab 2, May 1973. Solar panel deployment failure. Everyone wanted to abort the mission. I calculated the precise thermodynamics that proved we could complete repairs in EVA. Those astronauts spent 28 days in space because of my calculations." Chen whispered to the camera. "Ma'am, Harold Morrison was lead flight director for Apollo 9 through 12. He designed the emergency protocols you're still using today." "That's impossible," Amanda stammered. "Harold Morrison died in 1987. It's in all the historical records." "No," Harold said, his voice heavy with 3 decades of bitterness. "Harold Morrison was erased in 1968. There's a difference." On the screen, the oxygen countdown showed 26 minutes remaining. Commander Mitchell's voice broke through the tension. "Houston, whatever miracle you're working on, we need it now. Tom Rodriguez is already showing signs of hypoxia." Harold's hands flew across the laptop keyboard with startling speed, his fingers remembering routines that had been burned into his muscle memory decades ago. "Amanda, I need you to access the environmental control subroutine, subsection Delta 7. The code is November, Alpha, Sierra, Alpha 1967. "Sir, that's a legacy access code. It shouldn't even work anymore." Amanda's voice trailed off as her computer screen changed, revealing system diagnostics that hadn't been accessed in years. "Because I wrote those systems," Harold said simply. "Now listen carefully. Your team is trying to restart the primary oxygen generator, but that's not the problem. The issue is in the thermal regulation loop. There's a cascade failure in the coolant circulation that's causing the oxygen scrubbers to overheat. You need to isolate circuit C14 and reroute power through the backup transformer array." Amanda's fingers flew across her console. "But sir, that will cause a temporary power loss to navigation systems. The shuttle could drift off course." For exactly 47 seconds, Harold calculated in real time. "I'm transmitting the precise attitude adjustment sequence now. Execute it at T-18 minutes, and the thermal loop will stabilize." In the nursing home room, Jennifer Walsh watched in stunned silence as the man she had known as a confused patient revealed himself to be a master of aerospace engineering. General Reynolds stood at attention, recognizing the authority that came not from rank, but from pure expertise. The tension was unbearable as Amanda Torres made the decision that would either save 6 lives or doom them. Endeavour, this is Houston. We're implementing emergency protocol Morrison. Stand by for power cycling in 60 seconds. Morrison 1? Commander Mitchell's voice carried a note of recognition. As in Harold Morrison? The Harold Morrison? I thought he was a legend. No, Sarah, Harold said, speaking directly to the astronaut for the first time. Legends are dead heroes. I'm just a man who refused to let politics kill people. Now execute the sequence exactly as transmitted. Your daughter is counting on you coming home. The mention of her daughter sent chills through the communication link. Commander Mitchell had never spoken about her family on official channels, but somehow this ghost from NASA's past knew exactly what would motivate her in this crucial moment. As the power cycling began, every person in both locations held their breath. The next 90 seconds would determine whether a forgotten genius could reach across 3 decades of exile and betrayal to save lives that hung in the balance of his suppressed expertise. The silence stretched like an eternity as Endeavour's systems cycled through Harold's emergency protocol. In mission control, Amanda Torres watched her displays with white-knuckled intensity, while at Sunset Manor, Harold sat motionless, his eyes fixed on readouts that would determine whether his calculations were still valid after 30 years. Houston, we have thermal stabilization. Commander Mitchell's voice broke through the static, barely containing her relief. Oxygen generation is coming back online. Whatever you did, it's working. The Houston control room erupted in cheers, but Harold simply closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. The weight of 6 lives no longer pressed down on his shoulders, but a different burden remained, the crushing realization of how many other crises might have been prevented if his expertise hadn't been buried along with his reputation. Chen turned to Harold with tears in his eyes. Sir, you just saved the International Space Station mission. The scientific research they're carrying, it could revolutionize cancer treatment. You saved more than 6 lives today. But Harold wasn't looking at the young flight director. His gaze was fixed on Jennifer Walsh, who stood frozen in the doorway, her entire understanding of reality restructured in the span of an hour. For 3 years, she had seen him struggle to remember where he put his glasses, had patiently explained that his wife wasn't coming to visit because she had passed away in 1989. Now she realized that his apparent confusion might have been the protective shell of a brilliant mind forced into exile. Mr. Morrison, Jennifer whispered. I fed you applesauce yesterday. I helped you tie your shoes. How could I not know? Harold's expression softened for the first time since the crisis began. Because, Jennifer, that's exactly what they wanted. A confused old man is harmless. A sharp-minded engineer with inconvenient truths is dangerous. General Reynolds approached Harold's wheelchair, her military bearing replaced by something approaching humility. Sir, we owe you an apology that's 30 years overdue. The Apollo 1 investigation, your recommendations could have saved lives throughout the entire space program. We let politics and pride cost this country its greatest safety engineer. Could have, Harold repeated, the same bitter phrase he'd used earlier. But the real tragedy isn't what happened to me. It's what happened to the program when truth became subordinate to image management. Amanda Torres's voice came through the communication link. Mr. Morrison, I've been reviewing your original safety protocols. If we'd implemented them after Apollo 1, we might have prevented the Challenger disaster, Columbia, dozens of near misses that never made the news. How do we make this right? Harold stared at the screen for a long moment. The young flight director reminded him of himself at that age, brilliant, dedicated, still believing that competence and integrity would always triumph. He envied her innocence even as he mourned his own lost idealism. You don't make it right, Harold said finally. You make it better. Every safety protocol you implement going forward, every life you save, every mission that comes home safely, that's how you honor the astronauts who died because bureaucrats valued appearance over substance. Chen pulled up a chair beside Harold. Sir, NASA is initiating a complete review of our safety protocols. We want to implement everything you recommended in 1967, plus any improvements you've developed since then. Will you help us? The question hung in the air like a prayer. Jennifer Walsh found herself holding her breath, realizing that this moment would define not just Harold's future, but her own understanding of human dignity and the price of truth. Harold looked around the room, at the general who represented the system that had destroyed him, at the young engineer who embodied hope for redemption, at the nurse who had unknowingly cared for a hidden genius. His decision would echo through space program history, but more immediately, it would determine whether 3 decades of exile had killed his spirit or merely tempered it into something stronger. On one condition, Harold said slowly, everything we develop gets published openly. No classified protocols, no buried reports, no political considerations. If we're going to save lives, we do it in the light, where congressional oversight and public scrutiny can hold us accountable. General Reynolds nodded immediately. Agreed. Full transparency. And one more thing, Harold continued, his voice carrying a note of mischief that Jennifer had never heard before. Jennifer stays on the team as my personal advocate. If you're going to trust a senile old man with astronaut lives, you need someone who isn't intimidated by rank or reputation to tell you when I'm actually losing it. Jennifer's eyes widened in shock, but Harold's smile was genuine for the first time in years. After all, he said, you're the only person in this room who's seen me at my most vulnerable and still treated me with dignity. That's a qualification you can't get from MIT. As the crisis officially ended and Endeavour continued its mission to the International Space Station, the ripple effects of Harold Morrison's resurrection were just beginning. NASA would soon announce the most comprehensive safety review in its history. Engineering students would study the Morrison protocols for generations. And in a small nursing home in Texas, the impossible had happened. A forgotten genius had reclaimed his voice and changed the course of human space exploration. But for Harold, the greatest victory wasn't professional vindication. It was the look of respect and understanding in Jennifer's eyes, proof that even after 30 years of exile, human connection and dignity could still triumph over institutional betrayal. 6 months later, Harold Morrison stood in the renovated conference room at Johnson Space Center, watching through floor-to-ceiling windows as the newest space shuttle launched flawlessly into the Texas sky. Every system on board incorporated safety protocols that bore his name, protocols that should have been implemented 30 years ago but were finally getting their chance to protect human lives. Jennifer Walsh stood beside him, wearing her new NASA consultant badge with pride. The nursing home had been transformed into a specialized care facility for retired aerospace engineers, funded by a NASA program designed to preserve institutional knowledge and honor forgotten contributors. Harold had insisted on staying there, not out of necessity, but as a reminder that wisdom often comes disguised as weakness. The scars remained. Rebecca, his daughter, had visited twice since the crisis, their relationship still fragile but slowly healing. The years of separation couldn't be undone, but understanding was beginning to bridge the gap that politics and pride had created. Sarah's grave now bore a plaque acknowledging her husband's contributions, a small gesture that meant everything to a man who had been erased from history. Chen's voice crackled through the intercom. Harold, we've got telemetry confirmation. All Morrison's safety protocols are functioning perfectly. The crew is reporting the smoothest launch sequence in shuttle program history. Harold smiled, but his expression carried the weight of complicated victory. That's good, Marcus. Very good. As he turned away from the window, Harold reflected on the strange mathematics of redemption. 6 lives saved in 43 minutes couldn't balance 30 years of exile, but they had proven that truth, however buried, never truly dies. It merely waits for the moment when courage and necessity intersect, when the price of silence finally exceeds the cost of speaking. The space program would be safer now. Future astronauts would live because a stubborn old engineer had refused to let political expediency triumph over human life. But perhaps more importantly, a new generation of engineers would understand that expertise without integrity is meaningless, and that the greatest discoveries often come from those the system has forgotten. That's the incredible true story of how one man's exile became the space program's salvation. If stories like this fascinate you, tales of hidden heroes, forgotten geniuses, and the human drama behind history's greatest moments, Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We're constantly uncovering amazing stories of courage, betrayal, and redemption that shaped our world in ways you never imagined. What other forgotten heroes do you think deserve to have their stories told? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to share this with anyone who needs a reminder that truth and expertise matter, no matter how long they've been buried. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next incredible story.